Hi, I'm Ben and I run the Shut Up Brain podcast, and I want to go over 6 different ways that I have learned to stop having panic attacks. Because when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I started recognizing that I was having panic attacks. And after I did that, I recognized I've had them on and off my entire life. A little bit in childhood and a lot in my early 30s. And for me, they manifested in a feeling of extreme dread, a lot of stress, my body would shake, I'd feel very nauseous, and sometimes I would even faint. Yes, as embarrassing as that is to admit, I used to actually faint because of my stress, and it wasn't too fun. In fact, one time I even banged my head on the bathtub because I fainted during one of these panic attack episodes. So let's go ahead and get into the tips, because that's what you're here for. Well, tip number 1 is to recognize that I was having a panic attack in the first place. I wasn't even sure what was going on at first. I just felt nauseous, I was shaking, and eventually I just hit the floor. And after going through the various medical things that this could be, and eventually even seeing a doctor for it, it turns out it was just high stress, it was just panic attack and anxiety attack. And so that was the very first thing, is recognizing that. And I also had to learn to recognize that I wasn't feeling very stressed out, I wasn't feeling very anxious, but I was feeling very frustrated and very angry a lot of the times. And for me, that's how my anxiety manifests. I tend to get just angry at the world, at certain things, and so I think especially with men, and even some women too, if you find that you're angry a lot of the time, it might be because you're actually anxious about what is going on. The second thing I did to stop having panic attacks was to learn to meditate. Now, before this point, I had learned to meditate, but I was doing it kind of sporadically on and off. But once I realized, hey, I have a problem with anxiety, I got to get this under control, I started taking my meditation practice a lot more seriously. And the way that worked for me is I would meditate for 15 to 20 minutes as soon as I woke up in the morning. And it just found that over time, this reduced my overall stress, and it really was probably one of the best things I did ever to eliminate those panic attacks, or really prevent them from arriving in the first place. The third thing that I do all the time is I work out. If you watch this YouTube channel, I like to spend my anxious energy, or expend it in a physical way. I've always done jiu-jitsu, MMA, lifting weights, done all sorts of different things to get that energy out, and I find it to be very helpful. So if you do not currently do some sort of activity in order to burn off some of that anxious energy, I highly recommend it, whether it be walking or running. Really, I find, for me at least, it has to be something that actually breaks a sweat. That's how I know that it really kind of releases all that anxious tension that I have in my body. Is by the end of it, I'll feel exhausted, I'll feel tired, but I'll feel better. The fourth thing I did is just reduce overall anxiety. With panic attacks and anxiety attacks, yes, you can't have certain things that trigger them, but because what is actually happening is, it's almost like you can imagine that you have a glass of water. And if you have a lot of stress, that's like a lot of glass inside that water. And so if you add even a little bit more water, it's going to start overflowing. And so if you can reduce that stress overall, if you get a big spike of stress because of something that triggers you, it won't cause the glass to overflow, meaning that you won't have that panic attack, you won't have that anxiety attack. So if you can do something to reduce stress overall, that will help. That's why a lot of these different activities, it's not one certain thing that caused me to no longer have panic attacks. It's a combination of them all. It's the working out, it's the meditation, it's recognizing my triggers. All these different things overall reduces my anxiety level. Number 5, pains me to say, but it is something that I really had to give up, and that is coffee.
No, see, I said coffee, coffee, coffee.
Right.
As in, I really need coffee, coffee, coffee. You know?
Or more specifically, caffeinated coffee. before I gave it up, I was drinking like triple shot espressos. I was really consuming as much caffeine as you can. And so if you're drinking Red Bulls, if you're drinking lots of caffeine, you might want to take a look at what your diet is like. And you might find that certain things spike your anxiety more than others. Maybe a lot of sugar. I don't think most people get anxiety spikes from eating vegetables, but maybe you do. I don't know. But for me, it was definitely coffee. And so I switched to decaf. And now I just drink a lot of tea. And now I have a very expensive tea habit because I like to find all the fancy teas from all over the world, and they're just absolutely delicious. I should make some YouTube videos about those too. Number 6 is recognizing my triggers. For me, in particular, I found that there's one thing that really spikes my anxiety a lot, and that is nausea. If I start feeling really nauseous because maybe I had something that didn't agree with my stomach, then it starts to spike my anxiety. And the thing that's particularly bad about that is when I get really anxious, I also get nauseous. So it's kind of like it's like a bad cycle that just gets worse and worse. But I've recognized that in myself. So now, now that I know that just because I'm feeling nauseous doesn't necessarily mean that my anxiety has to creep up. I can tell myself, hey, you know what? Maybe I just shouldn't have eaten 2 hamburgers. I should have just eaten only one of them. And that's probably what's going on here. And so that sometimes helps. And also recognizing if I'm going through a period in my life where it's a high level of stress. If that is the case, then I can recognize that and I can kind of do some good self-talk, which reminds me like, hey, I'm okay right now. I know this is just a temporary high period of stress. Maybe I need to do something extra, maybe have an extra meditation session, maybe drink even water instead of tea, or do an extra exercise session, something to reduce my anxiety overall because I'm in a very particular short-term anxious period. Well, hopefully you've been liking this video overall. If you like it, please hit that like button. It really does help me out, and subscribe for more videos. But there's a few things I wanted to cover as sort of a bonus here, and these are things that did not help with my anxiety and my panic attacks, things that just didn't help at all. And one of those things is beating myself up for having them. You know, I was in my late 20s when this started happening, and I was doing MMA, you know, I was mixed martial arts, I was doing jiu-jitsu. I felt like I was kind of a badass, for lack of a better term. And the fact that I was like fainting, it really made me feel like I was emotionally weak, and I couldn't get over it. I was like, man, I'm a strong person. Like, I'm a confident person. I'm really good at what I do. Why am I having these panic attacks? But having a panic attack isn't an indication that you are weak. It is simply an indication that you've been holding on to something for too long, and you haven't figured out a good way of letting go of stress. For example, I have this water bottle right here. It doesn't weigh very much. And if I were just to hold it in my hand just like this, that would be fine, and no one would think I'm weak for doing that. But if I held this out here for hours and hours and maybe days, eventually my arm is just going to want to fall off, and I'm just going to eventually just drop it completely. It'll probably only take 30 minutes for that to happen, because holding your hand out there, that's kind of hard. So that doesn't mean that I'm weak. It means that I've been doing things in a way that just really doesn't make sense for who I am as a person. And it means that if I can find a way to let go of that stress, let go of that anxiety, that is a much better way to live, or put down the stress, at least temporarily. Another thing that never really worked is trying to think my way out of a panic attack. I kind of viewed having a panic attack as something that I could recognize as it was coming on, and I'd think, oh man, I'm gonna have a panic attack, I gotta stay calm. And that doesn't really work. It just kind of makes you more anxious. So you can't really think your way out of a panic attack, unfortunately. There's no amount of logic that will work. Also, another thing that does not work is meditating your panic attacks away. I know that I said that meditation is helpful, and it's very, very helpful. Probably one of the most helpful things I've done when it comes to preventing panic attacks. But if a panic attack is already starting, you can kind of feel it starting to creep up, almost like the train is just gonna hit you with all that anxiety. Trying to meditate doesn't oftentimes work. But what sometimes works is focusing on your breathing. I have another video about a deep breathing technique. And also being mindful during the experience. The skills that I've learned in meditation about observing my thoughts, observing my emotions, observing the present moment, those do help pass an unpleasant experience. And so if your body is going through that cycle of having a panic attack, being able to observe it from a mindful perspective can make it a lot better, a lot more, I wouldn't say enjoyable, but at least it reduces the suffering of that event. And I think it actually makes them pass a little bit sooner. All right, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have your own tips for stopping a panic attack or preventing a panic attack, please drop them in the comments below. I would really like to hear about it. And I think the biggest thing to recognize is your brain is changeable. You can change. You know, in my early 30s and late 20s, I probably had a couple dozen panic attacks in a fairly tight period. And I just felt like I was kind of broken. But you can learn as long as you take action. You gotta be an action taker. And if you want to find more content like this, feel free to just look up my podcast on Spotify. It's called Shut Up Brain. I have over 100 episodes there. I talk about all sorts of stuff like this, as well as productivity, lifestyle, different ways to improve your life. So until next time, I'll see you later, action taker.